Chapter 15, The Late Show. Later that day, David Letterman sat behind his desk on the set of The Late Show. He just finished his top 10 list for the evening, the top 10 things to stuff a turkey with, and the audience roared with laughter. "Ladies and gentlemen," he interrupted, "have we got a blockbuster show for you tonight? Arnold Schwarzenegger, Vin Diesel, and Bruce Willis are on the show to tell us about their newest action-packed thriller. Can you believe it? All three of them in the same film." He paused while the audience hooted and hollered. "And do you like the loud music, kids? Well, you better stick some cotton in your ears because Fred Durst and Limp Bizkit, the bad boy fusionists of hip-hop rock, will be out a little later to trash this joint." He paused again while the audience hooted and hollered some more. "But Schwarzenegger, Diesel, Willis, and Limp Bizkit will have to wait because I've got a hot one for you tonight. It's time to bring out my first guest. You've all seen him on TV and in the papers the last 2 weeks. Nobody can stop talking about the kid in the bear suit. He stormed the NFL, he stormed the United States, and he stormed New York too. Give a nice round of applause to my replacement when I retire, and to America's newest hero, Mr. Anthony T.B. Madison." He paused, stood up, and looked to the right of the stage as the audience applauded. But America's newest hero was nowhere to be seen. Tony was not there to make his grand entrance. The applause died out, and the Ed Sullivan Theater grew quiet. David Letterman turned to the producer. "Where is he?" The producer shrugged his shoulders. David Letterman turned to the audience and shrugged his shoulders, mimicking the producer. "My hotshot producer, who's obviously making way too much money, has no idea where the kid in the bear suit is. It seems that for the first time in the history of The Late Show, we have lost a guest. This ought to send the ratings into the toilet for us. The black and silver-haired chump over at NBC is really going to get some mileage out of this." He looked at the producer again. "You really don't know where he is?" The producer's head moved back and forth, and he shrugged his shoulders again. David Letterman stepped in front of his desk and looked at the Late Show orchestra director, Paul Schaefer. "Paul, do you know where the kid is?" "Got me, Dave," Mr. Schaefer said as he ran his hand over his bald head. "I'm in charge of the music, not the guests. We've been working together for over 20 years, and that's all you can come up with? It's pretty lame, eh?" Mr. Letterman said as he rubbed his chin. "Perhaps you'd rather be in charge of the border crossing between North Dakota and Saskatchewan instead of the music at the Late Show." "Good idea, Dave," Mr. Schaefer said. "Maybe I'd get to wear one of those cool red uniforms to work every day." Mr. Letterman rolled his eyes, lowered his chin, and looked over the top of his glasses. "I wonder if Madonna had something to do with this." The doors to the Ed Sullivan Theater burst open, and 6 Harley-Davidson motorcycles, each with a driver and passenger, roared down through the 2 center aisles, the 2 left aisles, and the 2 right aisles. They stopped at the foot of the stage. The motorcyclists revved the engine, vroom, 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 and then, as if on cue, cut them off at the same time. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Letterman said as he looked at the spectacle before him, "this is worse than the invasion of the body snatcher. It's the invasion of the bikers from Hades." He paused and surveyed the bikers. "And I suspect America's newest hero is the devil behind this invasion." Tony unwrapped his arm from Mr. Davidson's belly, slid off his motorcycle, and hopped on the stage. He confidently walked up to Mr. Letterman and held out his hand. "Hi, Mr. Letterman, I'm Anthony." "That's Dave to you, and I'm pleased to meet you, Anthony, and, Mr. Letterman said as he shook hands with Tony and eyeballed the bikers. "Where have you been? At a Hell's Angels cookie bake-off or something?" "Please call me TB, Dave, and sorry about being late, but as you know, things sort of happened to me." "Another understatement, TB." "Is that something like underwear?" asked Tony. "I don't have a clue, kid. I figure that if I use big words, I'll impress my boss and I'll be able to hold on to my job for a while. But that could be a pipe dream when you consider tonight's fiasco. So maybe I better fill out a job application over at Rupert's Deli before I head home tonight," Mr. Letterman said as he walked to the foot of the stage. "So, who are all these clowns?" Tony hopped off the stage and gestured for Mo and Anna to join him. "This is Anna and Mo," Tony said as Anna and Mo joined him. "They're my friends." Mr. Letterman stepped down into the center aisle and held out his hand. "Glad to meet you, Anna, and Mo, you're pretty brave to be TV's best friends, huh?" That's an understatement, Mr. Letterman, said Moe as he shook Mr. Letterman's hands. I'm happy to meet you, too. Oh, I'm happy to meet you, too, Mr. Letterman, said Anna as she pumped Mr. Letterman's hand. And as far as I'm concerned, it's totally understandable why I'm brave enough to be Tony's best friend. Look at him. He's more handsome than Bruce Willis, isn't he? Sorry, Anna, but I plead the Fifth Amendment. Mr. Willis is on the show tonight, and he's tougher than me, so I'll keep my trap shut, or I might be visiting an undertaker tomorrow instead of watching the Weather Channel. Your weekends are pretty exciting, huh, Dave? Asked Tony. Another understatement, said Mr. Letterman. After I watch the Weather Channel, I usually organize my socks. Like those cool white ones you're wearing now? Tony teased. Exactly, said Mr. Letterman, pulling up his pant legs so the cameraman could zoom in for a close shot. So, who are the rest of these characters? The big guy is Mr. Harley Davidson, and the other bikers are members of his band, the Angels, said Tony. Mr. Letterman and Harley shook hands. Even geeks in white socks know something good when they hear it, and I have to say the Angels really rock, said Mr. Letterman. Harley, I'd love to have the Angels play on my show sometime in the near future. What do you say? It'd be a darn pleasure, drawled Harley. Tony motioned for two other passengers to join him. A dark-skinned man decked out in a vivid white turban and a dark-skinned girl with long silky black hair joined Tony. Tony put his arm around the man. This is Mr. Rosh, New York City's best taxi driver and soon-to-be best child psychologist. He helped us today. Rosh held out his hand. So, you are the letterman? Now I know where to find you. Rosh scanned the theater. Rosh on TV now? Maybe my family will see me in Mumbai. Yeah, Mr. Raj, you're on TV, but I have no idea if the late show is shown in Mumbai, said Mr. Letterman as he shook Raj's hand, paused, and then looked at the girl. And who's this young lady? Mo stepped forward and smiled at the girl. This is Divya. She's a friend of Raj's, and she's a new friend of mine. Ours. Mr. Letterman winked at Mo and placed his hand on Divya's shoulder. It's a pleasure to have such a pretty young lady on the show. Divya blushed and said, It's good to be here. Tony pointed at the final passenger and smiled. I think you know who she is. An attractive woman with blonde hair slid off the last motorcycle and made her way to Mr. Letterman. Ladies and gentlemen, before me stands the only reason to watch MTV, Miss Luka Stankovic, said Mr. Letterman as he kissed her on the cheek and took her hand in his. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Luka, even under these unfortunate circumstances. How about coming back when things are a bit calmer around here, as we discussed earlier? I watch you every chance I get, so I'd love to, Dave, Luka said, smiling at Mr. Letterman, as long as you promise to wear black socks when I'm on the show. I promise, said Mr. Letterman as a goofy grin spread across his face. And I think maybe I'll ditch the Weather Channel tomorrow and tune into MTV instead. Good plan, interrupted Tony. And after you watch MTV, why don't you tune into the Fashion Channel and check out this season's designer socks? Laughter rippled through the audience. Mr. Letterman shook his head and smiled. You're pretty funny, TB. Maybe you'll have your own show someday. There's no doubt about it, Dave, because I'm going to take over for you when you retire. With the way this episode's going, you might have yourself a job on Monday, TB, said Mr. Letterman, looking at his watch. But this is my show for the next 40 minutes, and it's time to move it along. If you say so, Dave. Mr. Letterman looked at the producer. I say so, and Mr. Paid Too Much Guy says it's time for a commercial. All of you late show lugs sitting around the stage with what seems to be nothing to do, listen up. When we come back, I want the cycles out of here and the surprise guests seated in the audience, and I want America's newest hero seated next to my desk.